The crystal glasses chimed softly against the marble table as my mother set down another bottle of champagne. The Morrison family's annual achievement dinner was in full swing, though I felt little reason to celebrate. At the head of the table, my sister Victoria basked in the spotlight, her designer dress catching the light as she recounted her latest triumph. And just like that, I became the youngest VP in Marshall & Sons history, she declared, drawing murmurs of approval from the rest of the family. The CEO said my restructuring plan was brilliant. I sipped my water, trying to fade into the background like one of the room's overpriced art pieces. These dinners had become ritual over the past 5 years, an evening of carefully veiled boasting, subtle jabs, and silent scorekeeping. Success was currency, anything less was tolerated, at best. Elizabeth, Aunt Patricia's voice snapped through the conversation like a whip. Still doing that consulting thing? Heads turned. I could feel their scrutiny like a spotlight. At 32, I was the cautionary tale, the one who'd left a gilded role at Goldman Sachs to start a consulting firm no one cared to understand. Yes, I said evenly. But before I could elaborate, Victoria gave a dramatic sigh. Poor Elizabeth, she said, her voice thick with insincerity, still spinning her wheels. We've got some entry-level positions opening at Marshall & Sons. I could pull a few strings. She's just a consultant, my mother added, refilling Victoria's glass while conspicuously skipping mine. We really thought she'd do something more substantial. My jaw tensed, but I held my smile. None of them knew the truth. To them, I was still the underachiever, the black sheep. What they couldn't see was that, just a consultant, was a carefully constructed mask. For the last 5 years, I'd built Shadow Peak Consulting into a silent titan, operating through a web of shell companies, acquisitions, and strategic alliances. Well, not everyone can be a Victoria, my father said proudly. She's closing the biggest deal in Marshall & Sons history. The Global Dynamics merger will change everything. Victoria lit up like a chandelier under his praise, but I had to stifle a grin. The Global Dynamics merger, if only they knew who really pulled the strings on that deal. I actually have some news, I began. Oh, sweetheart, my mother interrupted with a wave of her hand. Maybe save your update for another time. Victoria was just about to tell us about her new penthouse. I went quiet, watching as my sister launched into a breathless monologue about panoramic skyline views and imported marble countertops. Let them have tonight, I thought. Tomorrow would rewrite the script. Later, in the quiet of my modest apartment, the one they all assumed was the best I could manage, my phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, my COO. Everything set, the board approved the terms, they don't suspect a thing. I smiled. They had no idea that behind the curtain of the Global Dynamics deal was one of my shell companies. The merger Victoria thought would cement her legacy would instead hand the keys of Marshall & Sons to Shadow Peak Consulting. In less than 12 hours, the family would learn the truth. The firm they'd mocked for years wasn't just real, it was ruthless, powerful, and now in control. Victoria's crown jewel deal was about to become her biggest downfall. I stepped out of the elevator and into my apartment, not the real one, tucked high in the clouds of the city's most exclusive tower, but the decoy, the disguise. After all, appearances are everything, until they're not. I maintained this apartment for family visits, just convincing enough to fit the narrative they'd assigned me. Inside, I opened the concealed walls safe and withdrew the final documents for tomorrow's reveal. The morning would deliver the kind of theatrical twist my family lived for, only this time. The spotlight wouldn't be on Victoria's triumphs or my father's legacy. It would be on me. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. The signage is up. By sunrise, your name will be on the building. Everyone will know who's in charge. I poured myself a glass of wine, not the bargain bottle they imagined I sipped alone, but a rare vintage worth more than Victoria's monthly shoe budget. Tomorrow wouldn't just end their illusions, it would rewrite everything. No more, Elizabeth the disappointment. No more, just a consultant. They were about to learn who I'd become while they weren't paying attention. The next morning, I stood in my true office. The entire top floor of the Shadow Peak Tower, floor-to-ceiling glass offered a commanding view of the skyline, including the Marshall & Sons headquarters, now bearing my name in gleaming silver. Ms. Hamilton, my assistant, Sarah, appeared in the doorway, composed as ever. The executives are assembled. Your sister is being vocal. I adjusted the cuff of my tailored Orman suit, sleek and unapologetically powerful, nothing like the understated attire I wore to family dinners. How long have they been waiting? 20 minutes. Your father has declared himself a busy man 7 times so far. Excellent. I picked up my tablet and walked with purpose toward the conference room. And the signage? Just finished, perfectly visible from their window. Outside the heavy oak doors, I paused. From within, Victoria's voice rang sharp and indignant. This is absurd. Do they know who we are? When this so-called CEO finally shows their face. I pushed the doors open. The room fell instantly silent. Victoria, mid-tirade, froze with her mouth half open. My father's coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. My mother, ever the portrait of control, turned ghostly pale. Elizabeth? Victoria blinked. What are you doing here? This meeting is for senior executives. I strode to the head of the table and set my tablet down. Good morning. I appreciate your patience. Shall we begin the discussion on Shadow Peak's acquisition of Marshall & Sons? Acquisition? My father thundered, standing. This is a merger meeting with Global Dynamics. Where is Shadow Peak CEO? I calmly took my seat. You're looking at her. The silence hit like a detonation. Victoria's heel clicked nervously against the marble floor. No, that's not possible, she whispered. You're a consultant. You work in that tiny shoebox office. That office? I smiled. A decoy. We use it for small client meetings. Shadow Peak operates in 37 countries. And this building, I gestured out the window, is now part of our portfolio. As of this morning, so is yours. My mother found her voice. But the Global Dynamics deal was never what you thought, I said smoothly. Global Dynamics is a Shadow Peak subsidiary, and the investment firm that's been quietly acquiring your shares over the last 3 years. Ours too. We now hold controlling interest. Victoria sank into her seat. Her skin had turned a shade too pale for her expensive foundation. The merger terms are final, I continued, pulling up the contract on the main screen. Effective immediately, Shadow Peak assumes operational control. A full restructuring will follow, starting with the termination of the Vice President of Operations. Victoria shot upright. You can't fire me, I'm your sister. Which is exactly why I should have questioned your qualifications sooner. I turned to my father. The board ratified everything last night, after reviewing the real financials, including the creative bookkeeping hiding your mounting debt. He slumped back into his chair, the weight of lost control pressing down like gravity. Why? He asked, voice cracking. Why go to such lengths? I stood and walked to the window. Outside, my name gleamed in the morning sun above the Marshall & Sons Tower, now mine in every way that counted. Because 5 years ago, I said quietly, turning to face them, you told me I'd never amount to anything without the family name. That leaving Goldman Sachs meant I was throwing my future away. I let the silence stretch, let them sit with it. Turns out, I said, smiling, I didn't need your name, I only needed mine. So I built something better, something bigger. While you were all laughing at my little consulting business, I was creating an empire. Sarah entered silently, distributing folders to everyone at the table. These documents outline the transition. I continued, Victoria, your security clearance has been revoked. Human Resources will escort you out after this meeting. Mom, Victoria pleaded, turning to our mother, who sat frozen in her chair. Do something. But there was nothing she could do, nothing any of them could do. Last night at dinner, I said, my voice cutting through Victoria's rising panic, you called me a nobody. You spent years mocking my career choices, belittling my achievements, assuming my silence was weakness. I walked to the door, then turned back one final time. I want you to remember this moment, remember the sister you dismissed, the daughter you devalued. Now, I own everything you spent your lives bragging about. The next hour passed in a blur of signatures and legal formalities. Victoria was escorted out by security, mascara streaking down her face. My father avoided my gaze as he handed over the company keys. My mother, for once, was speechless. Later that evening, I stood in my office, watching the sun dip below the skyline. Sarah appeared with a glass of champagne, the same high-end brand my family had drunk the night before while belittling my supposed failures. Was it worth it? She asked softly. All these years of hiding your success? I thought about the decades of condescension, the dismissive comments, the patronizing offers of entry-level positions. Then I thought about the empire I had built, the thousands of employees who relied on me, and the positive changes I could now implement at Marshall and Sons. It wasn't about revenge, I said finally. It was about proving that success doesn't always look the way they think it should, that you don't have to follow their path to build something meaningful. I raised my glass to the gleaming letters now crowning the building, Elizabeth Hamilton, CEO. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the most powerful. Sometimes, the child they underestimate becomes the giant they must answer to. And sometimes, the sweetest victory isn't proving them wrong, it's showing them you never needed their approval in the first place. The following year brought changes none of my family could have predicted. Marshall and Sons, under Shadow Peak's leadership, transformed into a more ethical, innovative company. Victoria eventually found a mid-level position at another firm, hopefully having learned the value of humility. My parents, their social standing shattered, stopped hosting their achievement dinners. And me? I kept building, growing, expanding. Not to prove anything to them anymore, but because I discovered something they never understood. True success isn't about titles, family names, or yearly bonuses. It's about creating something meaningful. Something that lasts. These days, when people ask about my path to success, I tell them the truth. Sometimes, the best response to those who underestimate you isn't to prove them wrong immediately. It's to build something so magnificent that when they finally realize their mistake, it's already too late to matter.